Yeah, thanks for being here. Almost every face in this room is familiar. And the few that aren't, I look forward to getting to know you too. It's such a wonderful, welcoming community around here. Debbie and I arrived in Adirondack Lake on the last day of September 1999. Didn't know a soul. We just sort of arbitrarily decided, you know, maybe we'll move here. And we ended up buying a place in Bloomingdale. It was the first house we looked at and the only house we looked at. It was a complete wreck of a place. It had been in the market for years. It was ready to collapse, but we loved it. It was along the Adirondack River, and it needed new plumbing and new wiring, and the whole thing was ready to fall down. So that's how we spent our early time here. And we also arrived here in our early 40s. We didn't have kids. We had no plans to have kids. You know, we like kids, but other people could have them. And we could enjoy other people's children without having to do all the work. And then we thought, oh my gosh, you know, what an amazing place this would be to raise children. And when I have a guiding business, when I tell clients of my guiding business that, they think I'm talking about the mountains and the lakes and all the trails and the places to paddle canoes. But even more, I'm talking about you guys. I'm talking about the people around here. It's just an amazingly supportive, encouraging, tender place to be a human being. This is just an amazing community. Exemplary of that quality is, I was just reminding Pat Wiley over here in the front row, the very first person probably I met in Adirondack Lake was Pat. I walked into the library, I felt, you know, as a writer, we writers used to spend a lot of time in libraries before we used the internet to track information down. And I thought, I'm going to be spending a lot of time in this library, I better go in there and introduce myself and meet people. And I met Pat, and she was just so kind. And then any time I walked in the library again, she remembered who I was and my name, and everybody around here sort of treated us that way. So it's just been a wonderful place to live, and that I'm just reminded of all of that as I sit out and look out in this room at all of you. So thanks so much for being here. I'm here to talk about the book, so I guess I better do that. This book is my 7th. So I've done a bunch. My first one was about New Zealand, where I've spent a lot of time. I've been in New Zealand 12 times. So these days, in the kid era, when we're sending 2 kids to college, if I take a trip really far away, I might make it as far as Tupper Lake. But I used to, you know, cover a lot more ground. So I've been in New Zealand 12 times. My first book was about my early trips to New Zealand. I did a biography of a naturalist named John Burroughs, who was from the Catskill Mountains. Of all the nature writers who went before me, he's probably the one that inspired and influenced me the most. And one of the things I really like about John Burroughs, he lived 1837 to 1921. He was hugely famous in his time, and he's sort of forgotten today. He shouldn't be. Burroughs is, of all of our nature writers, I think he's the funniest. So Thoreau, John Muir, Rachel Carson, all wonderful prose writers who wrote wonderful things and made great contributions to the world, but they're sort of awfully serious. And I like a little humor mixed in with my nature. I always think humor makes everything more fun, more interesting. So Burroughs he's not really remembered as a funny nature writer. If you dig around, you can find an essay of Burroughs that doesn't have humor in it. But he really is overall a very funny writer, and he's one of my favorites. If you want to track down a Burroughs essay to read, one of my favorites, which I'm sure is available copyright free on the internet to read, the title of it is Our Rural Divinity, and it's his tribute to the dairy cow. And particularly to one dairy cow named Chloe that he fell in love with. And that's one of my favorite Burroughs essays. It's very, very funny. But Burroughs celebrated the Catskill Mountains, where he grew up. And if you read his books, his 27 books, you get to know the Catskills really well. I was drawn to want to live in the Adirondacks for 2 reasons, I guess. One was my mother's side of the family had been in the Adirondacks since the 1790s. So my mother's maiden name was Brownell. The Brownells settled around the Sacandaga River in the southern Adirondacks in about 1795. by 1797, my 4 times grandfather, Daniel Brownell, a Revolutionary War veteran, was town clerk of his township. A guy named George Washington was President of the United States at the beginning of that year, sort of cool. And yeah, long history there. And my mother left the Adirondacks. I thought that was a big mistake, so I wanted to move the genes back. And so that was one of the reasons I really wanted to live here. I always felt sort of rooted here. The family history was rich and very meaningful to me. And the other reason was I felt that the Adirondack Mountains really needed to have more effort paid to celebrate the nature that's here. So if you go to a bookstore and you look at the Adirondack section, there's a gazillion books about hiking trails full of information on how long the trails are and how you should be able to hike that. Barbara McMartin, who wrote wonderful hiking guides to the Adirondacks, a great big pile of them. I like Barbara very much, but she was sort of humorless. And she often says things like, you know, this hike should take you no more than 3 hours. And my attitude is sort of the opposite of Barbara's. I would say the hike should take you no less than 6 if you want to actually look at anything along the way and learn something. So I'm sort of an anti-46er. In fact, I've had to apologize to my son and a few friends. I have a little bit of a rant in the introduction to this book where I sort of pick on the 46er thing a little bit, because just hiking up, you know, a bunch of mountains at high speed to tick them off on the list is totally not my approach to the Adirondacks. In my guiding business, I think my job is to slow people down and to get them to smell the roses. Lots of wild roses out there, and all sorts of other things too. So that's sort of the approach to the Adirondacks that I take. Not to say that I don't climb a mountain at high speed once in a while, but I'm much more of a saunterer. I like to move slowly in the woods. I like to look at the plants and look at the animals and look at the fungi. Because I grew up with a basset hound, I'd like to get down on my hands and knees and sniff things. So if you're going for a nature walk with me, you'd probably wondered why I'm on my hands and knees sniffing something. Well, that's the basset hound in me. Anyhow, that's the other reason really why I'm here, is I felt the Adirondacks needed more nature writing. So we had Martha Revin, who wrote about the healing woods here and did some wonderful nature writing. And Kurt Steger is a fantastic nature writer. So I'm not the first or the only by any stretch of the imagination, but I've probably, my word count might be the highest. I've probably published in my lifetime probably over 2 million words of nature writing. They're quite amazing. I wrote a newspaper column for a chain of newspapers based in Connecticut for 32 years. And I've written a column for the Adirondack Explorer, the news magazine based here in town. I started subbing for Kurt Steger, who originated the column, in 2000, and then I started writing every column for that, every nature column for that magazine, I think in 2002. So that's 23 years of column writing. So there's a lot of material there. So this book pulls together material from that newspaper column that I wrote in Connecticut. So most of that material has never been seen by eyes in the Adirondacks. So if you've read a lot of my old stuff, hopefully there's something new in this book. And then I also pulled pieces from the Adirondack Explorer, my column there for all these years. And when you read your old stuff, you find some of the pieces you read, you can hardly believe that you wrote it because it's so good. And other pieces you read, you can hardly believe that you wrote it because it's so bad. So, you know, you try to leave the good stuff alone and you try to rewrite the bad stuff. So there's definitely some pieces in this book that had substantial rewriting before they went in the book, and some pieces I've hardly touched because I didn't feel that they needed it. But that was really fun. So the book is organized. I have a section of mammals. All the mammal stuff I wrote, that's in this book, ran in the Explorer. I'm going to read just one piece from there, and then I'll share more from other parts of the book. By the time I started writing for the Adirondack Explorer, it already had a bird column. If you've read the Explorer since the beginning, I think the Explorer started maybe 1998. Dick Beamish, the founder, and a guy named Alan Pistorius from Vermont, who was a neighbor of Dick's when he lived over there. He wrote the bird column for years and did a wonderful job. So the Explorer's always had an excellent bird column. Then it was John Thaxton for years. Now it's Joan Collins. And all three of these people are outstanding writers and bird people. But as a result, I'm not allowed, I am forbidden to write about birds for the Explorer. So for a guy who's really interested in birds, that's a bit of a handicap for me. So I had to pull all the bird pieces from my newspaper column, which was a fine thing to do. Anyhow, let me share a few pieces from this book with you. I should say in advance that if somebody reads aloud to me, I fall asleep. So if you fall asleep, I won't take it personally. And actually, when somebody reads aloud to me, I often close my eyes because I'm trying to visualize what they're sharing. So if you close your eyes and you're not asleep, that won't offend me either. Anyhow, the first section of the book, the title of it is These Have Hair. And the first piece, I think is a good one. It's got a little humor in it and some good science, I hope, too. And it's called White-tailed Deer Personal Ads. Years ago, a colleague of mine, eager to jumpstart his love life, began placing and answering personal ads in a newspaper. I didn't make this up. Let us just say that they led in interesting and sometimes shocking directions. Adirondack white-tailed deer seek relationships in similar fashion. They place their own personal advertisements of a sort. Other deer answer them. A certain amount of jousting and mating goes on, and the following June or thereabouts, does deliver fawns. For whitetails, the courting season begins in earnest in early fall. That's when testosterone levels rise in the males. Bucks that were downright sedate all summer, fixated mainly on food, begin to engage in what appear to be mock battles with sapling trees. Generally, the bigger the sapling, the grander and more powerful the buck. Where antlers push against a trunk, bark is rubbed off. These abrasions are known as buck rubs. Bucks create rubs about the same time that the velvet or fuzzy skin that covers antlers as they grow begins to tatter. As bucks continue to work out on young trees, the last blood-stained bits of velvet fall away. Further rubbing polishes the antlers, and scent is left on the trunks. Does, reading the nuances of the woods like some of us scrutinize newspapers or Facebook pages, take note of buck rubs. Their hormone levels rise in autumn too. By examining and sniffing these telltale signs of the season, the first salient personal ads of the whitetail rut, does learn about the bucks that made them. Meanwhile, as a whitetail buck, urged on by testosterone, engages trees in combat, his neck muscles grow bigger and stronger. His expanded neck may partly be a result of hormones themselves and partly a response to the increased exercise. One way or another, a stout link between head and torso helps a buck prepare for what follows, male-on-male conflicts, which involve lots of butting. The stronger his front end, the more likely a buck is to come out ahead in a showing match. Another white-tailed deer personal ad is the scrape. This is a bare patch on the forest floor raked clear by a buck with his front hooves. He chooses the spot, which is almost always under overhanging branches, more about those in a moment, and paws the ground until soil is exposed. Then he positions himself over the scrape, squats, and to use a polite term, makes water. He also makes a minor mess of himself in the process. In this way, a buck washes scent from tarsal glands located on the upper insides of his hind legs, down to the ground and into the soil. He is composing, in essence, a personal ad. This one might be translated roughly as follows. Strong, handsome male, sure to be a good father, at least in the sense of passing on traits desirable in offspring, seeks strong, attractive female for a passionate, short-term relationship. Leave response here. If you walk up to a scrape, mature bucks make dozens of them, and give it a sniff, the Bassadone thing, you'll detect an intense pungency rising from the ground. To a fellow deer, this bouquet delivers personal information loud and clear. Rival males take notice, and so do does. Mature does visit scrapes, and with noses far more sensitive than yours and mine, gather information. Often, but not always, a doe lingers, anoints the scrape in much the same way its maker did, and posts a reply, The next time a buck makes a pass through that part of his territory, he reads the message with his nostrils. He may also pick up messages left by rivals. Bucks are not averse to publishing personal ads on each other's groomed turf. A doe also sniffs the branches above a scrape. While the buck cleared that particular patch of ground, he likely rubbed his forehead on twigs and sturdier branches that grew overhead. Between his eyes and just above them, a buck has glands that produce sweat and pheromones. The pheromones represent, in essence, yet another kind of personal ad, delivering or reiterating information to does about the scrape's maker. Find a scrape in the woods, as skilled hunters know how to do, and look just above it. You'll likely find broken twigs. They testify perhaps to the fervor of the buck that budged and battered them with his forehead. The twigs may be wet, even if the weather has been dry. Bucks often lick twigs in the process of scraping and scent marking. Does moving through the woods leave scents and messages of their own. Bucks stalking them take note. The news posted by females changes over time. First, it tells of prospective mothers not yet ready to step over the threshold of the whitetail's impromptu version of matrimony. Later, as mature does enter heat or estrus, generally sometime in November, the messages grow urgent. From this point on, and for several days thereafter, does and bucks sleep little, if at all. Of course, it's all good for a good and wholesome cause. To maintain a population of beautiful, graceful deer in the woods, there has to be romance. And the romance must play out in the whitetail's time-honored way through placing personal ads. Big, dominant bucks and robust, healthy females post the most compelling messages, and they do most of the breeding. 28 weeks later, more or less, after the snows of winter have come and gone, generally between late May and the 4th of July, fawns make their debuts. And that's the end of that. See, I've got one other mammal piece here. I like mammals, so I'm going to read one more mammal piece. And one of the fun things about writing, especially when you write a column for 32 years, you have to keep yourself interested in the game. It could get monotonous for the readers as well as for the writer. So, you engage in wordplay, you come up with kooky twists on things, you pick a theme and run with the theme. It's just the writer entertaining herself or himself and trying to keep the readers with it and interested too. So the title of this one, I love coming up with the titles. Editors often change them, but I change them back. is how the Adirondack muskrat guards its musk. Any fan of the film The Wizard of Oz knows what makes the Hottentot so hot and what makes the muskrat guard its musk. The secret, asserts Bert Lahr's cowardly lion, is courage. Lahr got it partly right. The muskrat defends its hindquarters, where its musk-producing glands loom, and the rest of its carcass, with the courage that typifies all wild animals. But there's more to this semi-aquatic rodent's persistence than moxie. A muskrat, after all, represents a tasty and satisfying meal for any fox, coyote, raccoon, mink, eagle, hawk, or owl that can catch it. Otters eat a lot of muskrats too. To endure and to flourish, it must also excel in feeding, breeding, and maintaining a low profile. Let's consider these in reverse order. The muskrat is not flaming orange like a Baltimore Oriole. It's brown and quiet. And like its far larger cousin, the beaver, the muskrat builds a lodge with one or more secure underwater entrances. Adirondack paddlers, motorboaters, and hikers see muskrat lodges when they're out adventuring. Generally, you tell a muskrat lodge from a beaver's by the presence or absence of wood. Muskrats make lodges mainly out of soft stem vegetation, cattail stalks, for example. Beavers favor woody stems, ones that look like they've been sharpened on both ends by a pencil sharpener. Not all muskrats make lodges. Many live in burrows and banks. We don't see muskrats much, partly because in the presence of our species, they're mostly active at night. If you do spot one, look for something that looks like a big vole or field mouse swimming in the water. The muskrat, in fact, is a vole, albeit a very large one, Its cousin to our abundant meadow vole of open places and redback vole of the woods. The muskrat's tail is narrow, unlike a beaver's. In the water, it trails behind the muskrat like a tailgating water snake. An adult muskrat usually weighs between 2 and 4 pounds. By contrast, a mature beaver, how one judges the maturity of a beaver is a subject for another day, may weigh 30, 50, or even 80 pounds, with record beavers weighing over 100. As for breeding, Captain and Tennille didn't sing about muskrat love for nothing. To put it politely, the muskrat is a paragon of fecundity. Dollops of musk, judiciously placed, seem to function like personal ads, telling other muskrats of an animal's gender and reproductive inclinations. Females give birth to several litters of up to 14 little ones in a year. The babies pop out blind and pink. In the South, muskrats start breeding at 6 months of age. Here in the cooler, more puritanical Adirondacks, a year is the norm. If you still harbor doubts about the muskrat's ability to make more muskrats, just ask a Netherlander. Muskrats were introduced to Europe by furriers early in the 20th century. In a matter of decades, they conquered much of the continent and began a rapid march across Asia. Muskrats cause much mischief in Holland, where their burrows inflict terrible damage on dikes that hold back the North Sea. A whole lot of breeding, of course, demands a corresponding orgy of feeding. Muskrats excel at that too. At our place along the Saranac River, evenings and mornings, I sometimes see a muskrat haul itself out of the water and gnaw the bark off a red osier dogwood stem like we eat corn on the cob. The lion's share of the animal's diet consists of plant matter. Cattails, water lilies, pickerelweed, and arrowhead are heavily favored. Yet the muskrat is no vegan. We see evidence of its taste for flesh when we're out boating on lakes and rivers. Those piles of mussel shells you see along shorelines are not, for the most part, left by raccoons, as my Adirondack grandfather used to tell me when I was chasing bass and bullheads with him. To catch mussels effectively, you've got to be a good diver, something the raccoon is not. What do they do down there? In addition to grabbing mussels, many of the shell middens you see were formed under winter ice. Muskrats catch and gorge on fish, crayfish, frogs, and salamanders. The muskrat's motto seems to be carpe diem. It lives moment to moment and enters the winter without stored food, or with very little. Contrast this with the busy and forward-thinking beaver. The beaver spends summer and fall laying up caches of edible limbs and twigs to tide it over the winter. Which brings us back to courage. To live in the Adirondack Mountains and survive our long winters and short summers, an animal has to be brave, foolish, or both. The muskrat seems a little of each, fearless as any of the rest of us, and improvident enough that, to survive the winter, it sometimes has to move in with a beaver or eat the insides of its own house. That was a fun one to do. Yeah, it's fun to write about, science. As I was taught science, I started off, I went to Middlebury College in Vermont. I started off as a biology major, but the way biology was taught at Middlebury in my time, it was so dry and really incredibly dull. What science could be more exciting than biology? There's all this wild stuff going on there, sex and violence, and it's all incredibly interesting. But as it's taught in the schools, it can be incredibly dull. John Burroughs' son Julian went to Harvard, and Burroughs went and visited Julian at Harvard one time and sat in on some of his classes. And Burroughs said they talk about they dissect a starfish one day and a great poet the next, and they do it in about the same spirit. So Burroughs wasn't too impressed about science teaching at Harvard. And Middlebury was a great place, and the science curriculum there is totally different today from when it was in my day. But I wanted to be a biology major, but I left the department because biology is the study of life. I think in my 4 years at Middlebury, and I took a lot of biology courses, we only went outside about once. So what did we study then? We studied dead stuff. The study of biology was taught by looking at corpses. So like I took a botany course. We spent endless time looking at thin slices of root hair tips under the microscope. I'm not making it up. And here I was in the Vermont countryside, surrounded by all these wildflowers and plants and ferns and mosses, and we could have been out there studying real plants, but no, we were learning to use a microtome, which is like a butcher's meat slicer, that scientists use to create specimens to study under the microscope. That was the serious, the way science was taught. So anyhow, I've ended up being sort of a self-taught naturalist and biologist, and I guess I've also learned a lot by hanging around with people who know a lot more than I do, and they're not hard to find. So if I meet somebody who knows about, some creature I don't know anything about, then I say, hey, could I come hang out with you one day? Could I follow you around and learn? And that's how I've learned a lot of what I learned. So I have learned a lot from books. I believe in book learning. It gets put down sometimes, but certainly in terms of natural history, you got to be out there in the field and learn for it and develop, a passion for it. Because the way science is taught, it's sometimes almost taught in a way where the teachers are trying to destroy the passion, and that's not as it should be in my estimation. So we're going to move on to a bird piece. This is a favorite piece of mine. I don't know that it's any great shakes, but I'm particularly fond of this short essay. And if you've ever, and everybody here probably has at one time, been out in Bloomingdale and you're driving back into Saranac Lake, you're coming back into town, and by the little brick building that my kids used to call the pooper station, where the sewage is pumped up to the sewage treatment plant, the speed limit drops to 30, and I was coming south from Bloomingdale into town, and I noticed a duck flying along, and the duck and I were both driving in the same direction, and anyhow, that's where I'm going to pick up the story. But that's where I saw what I saw that I describe in this piece. So this piece is titled "Race with a Duck." It wouldn't be fair, would it, to race a duck with a car? That's what I thought until yesterday. The duck wouldn't have a chance. I was driving our Toyota Camry parallel to the Saranac River on my way to Saranac Lake, which, as it happens, is a village, not a lake, when my left eyeball picked up the duck, flapping at high speed and at a steady altitude about 50 feet above the river. At first, the bird was flying at an angle to me, then it veered to follow the river and parallel the road, and suddenly it had most of my attention. It was a merganser, of that I was sure. Since I'm no great expert at naming ducks on the wing, I'm a little better now than I was when I wrote this, and since the lighting was against me, all I could be certain of is that the bird had the long, skinny bill, typical of a common or red-breasted merganser, and it was about the right size. Surely it was one or the other, probably a common, because commons are common hereabouts, and red-breasteds are not. The duck couldn't possibly keep up, could it? I was driving the speed limit, I guess I was before the 30 drop. I was driving the speed limit in a 45 mile per hour zone. As I zoomed along, the duck zoomed with me. I was sure I would gain on it, but the opposite happened. The duck gained on me. Eventually, it peeled off to the right, crossing over the road in front of me. The pace of its wing beats was astonishing. It wearied me just to watch them and think of all the calories, and indirectly fish, for mergansers are piscivores, the wing muscles were burning. I could hardly wait to get home and investigate the subject of duck flight speed in my favorite book of bird lore, John Terry's magnificent The Audubon Society Encyclopedia of North American Birds. Nobody looks at anything in birds anymore, in books anymore, but I still do. And that's a book I really love. The Saranac Lake Library always had a copy of it on the shelf. Reference books are out of fashion these days, buried by the internet. All the same, I still reach for Terry's. This book was his life's work, and it's a humdinger, the product of a tireless researcher, former editor of Audubon magazine, and a first-rate writer. Terry's came through for me as always. He reported, quote, a male red-breasted merganser pursued by Max C. Thompson, 1961, in an airplane in northern Alaska, attained the top airspeed of 80 miles per hour along a river for 1,500 feet before turning aside. With a wind of 20 miles per hour assisting the bird, Thompson reported its ground speed at 100 miles per hour, end quote. The peregrine falcon, which has been clocked in a dive at 175 miles per hour, has the merganser beat. Still, the merganser would risk a speeding ticket to traveling at that pace on an interstate highway. Why was the merganser I saw blasting along at such a rate? I saw no predator in pursuit, and no menacing cold front loomed over the next hill. It was baffling. Perhaps this was a young bird feeling its oats, or in this case, its minnows, putting itself to the test. Terry supplied other numbers too. He wrote that crows and their relatives are known to fly up to 45 miles per hour, buntings 37 miles per hour, starlings 49 miles per hour, and geese 45 miles per hour. How slow can a bird fly? That's an interesting question. If an airplane moves forward too slowly, it stalls and falls. Quote, of all flight speeds measured by Schnell, Terry tells us, that of the house sparrow was one of the slowest at 16 to 19 miles per hour. Apparently the minimal speed of birds in order to remain airborne is about 16.5 feet per second, or about 11 miles per hour. I always thought the peregrine was the world's fastest animal, speedier even than Africa's cheetah, but Terry disagrees. Quote, the swiftest, straightforward, wing-beating flight of any bird ever reported, he wrote, was made by a western bird, a spine-tailed swift. 2 flights were clocked by a scientist. One racked up a jaw-dropping ground speed of 172 miles per hour. The other 218 miles per hour. Wow. And that's the end of that one.
Wow.
Let's see. What are we going to get to next? Keep an eye on the time here. No, time's flying by. At least it is for me. One of the fun things about writing a column, when you write for magazines and publications, editors are generally very nice people, very talented, but they're frustrated writers, that's why they're editors. And one of the things they do is like to fuss with the prose that a writer creates, and they particularly, I found, like to mess with titles. So this book may actually be the only one of my books where the publisher actually kept the title, The Nature of the Place. They always change the title. But when you're writing a newspaper column, newspapers like having columnists and magazines too, because they assign the column writing slot to a writer that they trust to turn in decent copy every week or every month. And they know they're not going to have to mess with it much. So they, from my experience, usually don't really mess with it much at all. And so in writing columns, I've had a lot of my titles stand. My all-time favorite one, and I don't have this piece to read, this is not an Adirondack piece, but Debbie and I lived in the South for a while. We've also spent time in Australia. In both places, there are wild pigs. And wild pigs are quite dangerous, and they bite people and harm them grievously at times, and occasionally a wild boar especially will kill a human being in the woods. So anyhow, I wrote this, I wanted to write a column about wild pigs and how dangerous they are, and I wrote the column at the time that the first of the Steven Spielberg Jurassic Park movies had just come out. So the title of my column was Jurassic Pork. So I think that's my all-time favorite one. One of my other favorite ones was I did a piece, I had a friend who was an organic gardener, and she was always telling me about all this hoops she jumped through to do pest control in the organic garden without using pesticides. So I did it, so she had these endless battles, endless war against insects in the garden. And so my title of that piece was War and Peas. So in that vein, I'm going to read another one with a silly title, which I like. Sometimes I'll come up with a title and the whole piece starts with the title. The title is what drives me to write the story, and it drove me to write this one. So the title of this one is Confessions of a Serial Killer. But cereal is spelled C-E-R-E-A-L. So once I thought of that, I had to write this piece. So this is the serial killer talking. This is the serial killer's confession. So it's fun also in column writing is you can get weird, you can interview, you know, I've interviewed a bullfrog, I've interviewed a beaver, the ghost of Elvis has appeared in one of my columns, anyhow, it's fun to play around. So, Confessions of a Serial Killer. All right, autumn is upon us, bringing portents of winter, of a winter I do not expect to survive. I am old. 6 years and 3 months ago, I burst from an egg, which means, at least for a songbird, I'm borrowing time. To leave the fields, pastures, and meadows of this world with a conscience as clear as the one I arrive with, there are things I must get off my unspotted breast. They are dark things, not transgressions against my own kind, although there have been a few of those, but worse, crimes against the generous hands that feed me. I am, you see, a field sparrow and a serial killer. Oh, I slay insects in quantity too, especially in summer when they occur in staggering number and all but cry out for culling. Yet their destruction and consumption bring me no remorse. They are consumers and parasites of other forms of life, as are animals in general. It seems fitting then that I should devour them while I live, and that they should reduce me to bits and pieces after I die. No, it's my plant victims I mourn. They make magic with carbon dioxide, water, and sunshine, and out of thin air harvest the energy that sustains the rest of us. They are peace-loving, standing patiently in the sunshine, minding their own vital business. They grow and make subtle romance with each other and produce legions of blameless offspring. And what do we field sparrows do to thank them? We take our pink bills and crush their embryonic heirs without mercy. Most of all, I apologize to all the crabgrasses and foxtail grasses whose seeds I have slaughtered. These paragons of all that is right and good in the world have sustained me from youth to old age. Yet what have I done to them? I have plucked up the fruits of their reproductive labors and crunched them like popcorn. That's not all. I have combed open spaces for panic grasses, and when I found them, I've raked in their tender progeny without regard for their own reasons for living. Drop seed grasses, whenever I spy them, I pop their kernels into my maw and in my gizzard mash them into a creamy pate. Through it all, I sing a loud, prideful song. You have heard me. My notes begin full and round, often keeping a steady pitch, punctuated by distinct silences between them. Then comes a mad accelerando that blurs sound into sound. A hard ball bouncing on a wooden floor gives a sense of my rhythm. Simon Pease Cheney, writing in 1892 of my song, had this to say, quote, when we consider the genius displayed in combining so beautifully the three grand principles of sound, length, pitch, and power, its brevity and limited compass make it all the more wonderful. This little musician, he's talking about the field sparrow, has explored the whole realm of sound and condensed its beauties in perfection. Genius, perfection, guilty as charged, I'm afraid, but I digress. I am a serial killer, and I repent. Now I go to my rest in peace. That was fun. And I think I better do just one more to leave a little time for questions. And I got to read one of the weirder pieces in the book, just so you don't think I'm a straightforward guy. I have my strange side too, which is okay. Naturalists are sort of strange people. You go for a walk with them, they get drowned on the ground and start sniffing scat, or they stick their nose into a hole in the ground wondering if it's a fox den. You know if it's a fox den because the pee of a red fox smells like skunk spray a little bit. So anyhow, you can identify the red fox with your nose, just like a basset hound can. So this piece actually came to me sort of as a vision, and I'm sort of a meat and potatoes kind of a guy. I'm not a metaphysical kind of a person. I believe in what I can find to be tangibly true and don't tend to believe in much of anything else. But every once in a while, my mind wanders in some direction, and I get a sort of a crazy idea. And actually, late one winter night, I think Debbie and her kids were all in bed, and I was tired and late, and my mind, which tends to wander in directions I don't know where it's going to go, had this vision of driving to Tupper Lake, of all places, on a winter night. And I talk a lot when I'm out in the woods with people about the fact that we should have elephants living here in the forest. There were at least 2 species of elephant would have lived in the Adirondacks when the first people arrived here, the mammoth and the mastodon. We should have giant sloths living in the woods. All the big fleshy animals in North America disappeared within a few thousand years of humans arriving. We were taught a sanitized version of their disappearance, at least my generation was in school, that it was climate change that killed off these animals. But it's highly unlikely that is really the explanation, because the so-called Ice Age animals, the mammoths and the mastodons and the giant sloths, the giant beaver, they lived through many ice ages. They lived through many warm periods between ice ages, some of them warmer than the climate that we experience today. So these animals survived the vacillations of ice ages and periods between ice ages. The only warming period between ice ages that they didn't survive is the one that coincided with the arrival of a very smart, highly social creature that originated in Africa that could make stone tools and talk to other members of its species and plot and plan. And so the hunting pressure of people, and this isn't so much the American Indians, these are thousands of years ago, these early peoples, not anything like the Indians that Christopher Columbus and Champlain and Hudson encountered in North America. So these were much earlier peoples, and wherever humans went in the world, within a few thousand years, even Australia, with the ancestors of the Aborigines moved into Australia from we now know, from Sri Lanka. They eliminated all the big fleshy animals of Australia, so hunting pressures. The humans had a huge impact. So this natural, dense forest that we have in the Adirondacks is really a human construct. This forest should have elephants in it. The elephants should be eating the plants. They should be pooping all over the place. And the forest would be a very different place than it is now. There are scientists at work today trying to bring back the woolly mammoth. So if we can hang around a few hundred years, maybe we'll get to see that. So anyhow, this is a piece I wrote. I had this vision of driving to Tupper Lake on a winter night and suddenly finding myself 10,000 years or so in the past. A night drive to remember. A snow squall nearly blinded me as I drove south on Route 30 one wintry night. Just beyond Tupper Lake, I hit a patch of ice. That's right, I'm driving a long lake. I hit a patch of ice and the car spun. When it came to rest, the vehicle and I were still upright and still aiming toward Long Lake. At first, nothing seemed amiss. Then I noticed something odd. The date on my digital wristwatch read 10,000 BC. Shrugging this off, I resumed the drive. A few miles ahead, the road broke out of the woods and into the open. Wind hammered the car. Ahead, I spied huge animals of some sort, their hulking shapes white with snow. They moved awkwardly, some on the road, some off of it. Although the creatures looked a bit like bears, it was plain they weren't. The front legs were grossly oversized, the snouts too blunt, the hair too shaggy, and they were enormous, each animal stretching 8 or 9 feet long. The skid in the ice had somehow shifted me to the Pleistocene. Extinct animals were alive again. These were giant ground sloths. I guess they were Megalonyx jeffersonii, named in part for Thomas Jefferson, our first and only paleontologist in chief. Lumbering along in what seemed to be infinite leisure, the sloths bent over from time to time to snatch up herbs, shrubs, and other formerly green things that stuck up from snow along the shoulder. This giant ground sloth ranged as far north as Alaska. Otherwise, the animals just stood there looking clueless, blinking in the headlights. I had to get going. Slipping past the sloths, I'd just gotten up to speed again when my high beams illuminated a new set of animals. These looked like elephants with long hair. What a night! I punched the brakes. The woolly pachyderms ambled across the road, about a dozen of them. I had a dinner engagement with an old friend at a hotel in Long Lake. And if Long Lake was still there, I feared I'd be late. Still, all I could do was hit the brakes and gawk. Mammoths or mastodons? I looked at the tusks. The oversized teeth extended only a few feet beyond the jowls, too short for those of mammoths. Mammoth tusks were, or are, much longer, and they curl around toward each other. So these animals were mastodons. Each stood a little less than 8 feet high at the shoulder and weighed, I'm guessing, about 5 tons apiece. Mastodons were browsers, feeding mainly on the leaves, buds, and twigs of forest trees and shrubs, rather than on roadside wildflowers. In no time, these cleared off the road and vanished into the woods on the far side. I got going again, running a slalom course through steaming piles of dung. No sooner did the mastodons yield the road than a herd of larger and even hairier elephants blocked my way. These shuffled about, sweeping aside snow with extravagant curving tusks, and chomped on grasses and sedges along the shoulder. Woolly mammoths! Each mammoth towered over the car. The height of the brutes at the shoulder ranged from about 9 to 11 feet. I guessed their weights at 5 or 6 tons. The ears were short and well furred, and on the tops of their heads they wore hat-like lumps. Altogether, the herd suggested a convention of well-fed Shriners. I had my fill and was just about to ease through the mammoth herd when a pack of wolves turned up. They looked like gray wolves, but were more powerfully built. Dire wolves. My naturalist friend Peter O'Shea would never believe me when I told him what I'd seen. The wolves aimed their muzzles skyward and howled. They sounded like police sirens. Things got scared. The largest of the carnivores jumped on the hood of the car, dimpling the steel. Suddenly, separated only by thin, easily fractured automotive glass, we were eye to eye. Saliva dribbled from the corners of the dire wolf's mouth. Now I knew how the sloths felt. What to do? I remembered the horn, a quick blast, and my hood ornament and its companions turned tail and bolted. I had just about made up my mind to turn and go home, or try to, when a beaver the size of a black bear hauled itself onto the shoulder. I was admiring it when a huge cat, one day it will be known as Smilodon fatalis, hurled itself onto the beaver's back. The cat weighed 500 pounds easy and had saber-like canines 11 inches long. It was about to plunge its sabers into one of the beaver's carotid arteries when I spun the wheel and hit the gas. The drive back to Tupper Lake brought no more sightings. Pulling into a gas station and buying a coffee to chase away the chill and disbelief, I looked at my watch. The year now read 2021. That was the year I put this book together. Was the night's adventure a dream? I took out my phone and punched in a number. As my long-liked friend spoke, I heard a commotion in the background. Just as well you couldn't make it, he said. The place is full of rowdies. They're dressed in animal hides. They speak gibberish, and I think it's been years since these guys have had a shower, and everyone is carrying a spear. So anyhow, I'm going to stop there. So thanks. So hopefully there's some laughs in this book and some fun. Some of the places are a little bit more straightforward, but that's always what I try to do as a nature writer, is I try to make sure it's sound science, but I also like to appeal to, I decided early on in my nature writing that I wanted to write not just for people like me, but sort of, call myself a nature nerd sometimes, or sort of nature fanatic. I don't want to just write for the Ed Kanzes of the world. I want to write for people who wouldn't be caught dead reading a nature piece, generally. How many of those people I reach, I don't know. But anyhow, I try to make the nature writing fun and accessible and sort of kooky sometimes. But I also want the science in it to be sound. So it's fun to, research. When I researched and wrote that piece about that night drive, I looked up the weights of mammoths and mastodons and the height of them on the back. So I tried to get the information all right, but make a fun piece out of it too. So anyhow, that's what I do, and thanks for all of you for. If you read my stuff here and there, for giving me the opportunity to do it. It's a wonderful job to have. So why don't we open up the floor here? If does anyone have questions, comments? I'll take complaints. Anything you've got? Pat?
Ed, could you give an example of one of your titles and what your editor changed it to, or wanted to change it to?
Oh, that's a tough one. Some have been so outrageously awful. I just blotted them from memory. That's a great question. If you heard Pat's question, it was, do I remember any of the titles that editors changed my titles to? And, I don't think I'm going to be able to come up with one, just because it's always an awful one, and I change it back. So, one example, I guess, is my first book. It's a book about New Zealand, and lots of people have written stuff about New Zealand, but I wrote about the wild things of New Zealand. So it's a travel book with a strong nature focus. And New Zealand separated early from other land masses. Mammals never made it to New Zealand, other than bats, which could fly there. So New Zealand it has some ancient lineages of insect life, of reptilian life, of bird life, that exists nowhere else on the planet. And what actually drew me to New Zealand to begin with is a reptile called the tuatara. It looks like a lizard, but it's not a lizard. It's the last surviving beak-headed reptile of a group called the beakheads that lived all over the world before the dinosaurs, older than the dinosaurs, and were thought to be extinct for 65 million years, until a guy at the British Museum dissected one of these New Zealand lizards and discovered it not a lizard. So anyhow, New Zealand is this incredibly cool place, full of all these sort of throwback things that have disappeared in other places in the world. So I wrote my book, and I gave it the title of A Southern Eden. And I liked that title. I thought it was sort of nice, and I wanted to tie it into the fact that New Zealand has ended up with all sorts of things that have disappeared elsewhere. And my editor is a very nice guy, Jack McCrae, died recently, super famous editor in New York City. Henry Holt published that book, and he changed the title of the book to Notes from New Zealand.
Oh.
I don't know, that's awfully prosaic, Notes from New Zealand. It didn't really do much for me. But that's about the only example. But there are others. That's one of the not so bad ones. But there have been some grim ones. But fortunately nobody changed Jurassic Pork. That is my favorite. Yeah. Any other questions or comments? Yep.
For this current book, I've seen that you have used like some graphic or sketches, but not your own photographs, and you take some real beautiful photos. So was that a conscious decision, like on your part, of the editor, or if you are looking forward to sometime combining your images and
yeah, thank you. So the question was, this book has line art in it, but no photographs. And you've seen my photographs. I love photography. I do a lot of nature photography. I share my photographs on Facebook and LinkedIn. If you friend me there, to use that word "friend" as a verb, I'm still not quite used to that. But you can see my stuff a couple times a week. But book publishers tend to, book publishing is a fairly sketchy endeavor financially for the publisher as well as for the writer. And publishers are always looking to cut corners, and one of the ways they always cut corners in my books is to put no photographs in the book, or they do black and white conversions from my color photographs, and they're not really very exciting. So one nice bit of news I have to share is Jake Monar, the wonderful editor I work with on this book, Globe Pequot Press is the publisher. He lives in Buffalo. He sees my Facebook posts and my photographs, and so he wants me to do another book now that this one is out. That will be a collection of nature photographs.
Yay.
With some text in it. So that'll be exciting. There's one of my books has color photographs in it, and the wonderful Saranac Lake Free Library, which I should point out, you can read all my books for free. You don't have to buy them. I'm happy if you buy them, but you can read them for free. I gave the library a copy of the new book. My book on John Burroughs, The World of John Burroughs, the publisher came up with that title. It's a pretty good one. That book is full of color photographs. That book actually began as a slide lecture I put together for a professional conference of naturalists on the life and works of John Burroughs. And so, because the guy who was organizing the conference knew that I had been photographing the old Burroughs family farm and the Catskills, and I'd just gotten so interested in John Burroughs and everything he had to say. I was photographing birds that he wrote about, and I visited his childhood home, and I visited his grave, and so anyhow, it led to a slide program I put together of color slides for a professional conference mixed with archival black and white images from his time. And I was working in a park down in Westchester County actually at the time, and a man walked in one day and he needed some help finding some plants to photograph for a book he was working on, and it turned out he was a literary agent. And on the book he was working on, the photographer had backed out, so the literary agent was doing the photography for the book. And he was looking for certain plants. So he was a nice guy, and I was happy to help him. If he was a grouch, I still would have helped him. But anyhow, he said to me as we got to know each other, "Gee, Ed, do you have any ideas for books?" And well, that was a good question. And so, and he produced, as a literary agent, only illustrated books, so what are sometimes called coffee table books. So my big, fat, grimly serious scholarly biography of Burroughs, which I'd been working on for a few years, ended up morphing into a coffee table book on John Burroughs. And sometimes my book has been dismissed by critics because they assume that anybody who's a photographer couldn't also be a biographer. So one reviewer wrote a nasty review of my book. It was a 7-page long review, and pointed out that I was a former park ranger, and he suggested that a former park ranger couldn't possibly write a biography. I'd like to think he was wrong. But anyhow, that one book of mine, that's the one book that's full of a lot of my color photographs. Anyhow, hopefully within the next couple of years, I'll get a new one out with the crew that published this book, and they were really a pleasure to work with. Yes?
Did you have involvement on turning the Burroughs farm into what is now like a museum preserve?
As far as I know, and you might know something I don't know, I haven't been back to the Burroughs farm. It's in Roxbury, New York, privately owned last I knew. And last I knew it was still totally privately owned, so when I was there, I had to get permission from the owners to wander the property at will. And it was actually sort of a fun thing. I don't believe in ghosts, but I almost started believing in ghosts while working in my John Burroughs book. So the owners, Abe and Eva Hirsch, back in the early 80s when I was working on the book, gave me carte blanche to roam this farm in Roxbury in the Catskills anytime I wanted to. And anytime I wanted to was often meant arriving there in the pitch black before dawn, so I could catch the first blush of sunlight on the farm and on the buildings to get the best photographs. And I'd be up there at these crazy hours, poking around, and a pickup truck would drive back and forth up the road. And I could just about swear that the man driving the pickup truck was John Burroughs. And it was the guy driving the pickup truck was a dead ringer for John Burroughs. It was spooky. And Burroughs in this farm are so interwoven. If you read Burroughs's books, you come to know this farm intimately. And there was John Burroughs keeping an eye on me while I was working on the book. So I mentioned it to Abe and Eva Hirsch when I met him actually at a Burroughs Association meeting in New York City, and they laughed. And they said, "That's Curtis Burroughs." And he's a descendant, like a great-grandson of one of John Burroughs' brothers. And he used to own the farm, and they said he doesn't own it anymore, but he still keeps a close eye on it. So that was sort of fun. So has the Burroughs farm, do you know, been protected in some way?
Yeah, I'm not sure of ownership, but they've kind of turned it into a preserve at the very least. It's more of a walking museum.
Exciting.
Good education.
Yeah, that's really exciting. When George Pataki was governor of New York State for many years, I met him a couple times and met him once at a fundraiser event, or no, it was the groundbreaking event for the Wild Center before the building was built. And George Pataki was there, and he's a great admirer of, and vocal admirer of Theodore Roosevelt. Well, Theodore Roosevelt was a great friend of John Burroughs, and Theodore Roosevelt was a huge admirer of John Burroughs, and often credited John Burroughs for sort of firing his interest in nature. And so the Roosevelt legacy is well protected historically, but the Burroughs legacy is not. The the two main places associated with Burroughs, the house where he lived in the Hudson Valley, and then the family farm in the Catskills, were completely unprotected in those days. So anyhow, as soon as I met George Pataki, I quickly changed the subject to John Burroughs and suggested that the governor take an interest in preserving these Burroughs properties, because Burroughs was the man, as people would say, as far as Theodore Roosevelt was concerned. In New York State, I really wanted to see take an active role in acquiring these places and preserving them for posterity. And Pataki really liked the idea. So Debbie was with me, my wife, and he invited us. He said, we're going to come down, have you down to the governor's mansion. We're going to have dinner. Ron Stafford, the senator, state senator, was there, and he said, you know, Ron will come down too. He said, Ron's staff will arrange the whole thing. We'll all get together for dinner, and we'll talk about this. And the date of that conversation was just a few days before September 11th, 2001. So it never happened. But if other good things are happening to protect and preserve that Burroughs farm down there, it's really, that's exciting news to hear. Thanks, Howard.
How big was the Burroughs farm?
I would have rattled off that number to you at one time, a few hundred acres.
Okay.
I don't know, it's on a hillside outside the village of Roxbury in the northern Catskills in Delaware County. It's a lovely place. It's actually wilder today than it was when Burroughs was growing up there. Again, he was born in 1837. They were dairy farmers, and back in those days, there was no way to get milk to market. So the milk was actually a waste product. They fed the milk to the hogs. I mean, they had 10 kids. So the kids drank as much milk as they could drink. But most of the milk was fed to the hogs. And what they were after was the cream, which they churned. They used sheep, dogs, and children to turn the churn. And they made butter. And then twice a week, Chauncey Burroughs, Burroughs' father, and young John, one of the siblings, would hop on a wagon and they'd drive to Catskill, New York, where a steamboat would come up with the butter buyer on it, and they would test the butter and offer them a certain price based on the quality of their butter. It was packed in wooden containers called firkins. And so anyhow, I always thought that was interesting. A dairy farm where milk was the waste product. That's how it was in those days. Any other questions? Well, we've covered it all. I'm not rushing off, so some of you, I'm sure, need to go home and eat dinner or off to a restaurant. Oh, one more.
Riverbee.
Riverbee.
From John Burroughs. Have you ever seen that? Or?
Yeah, been there many times. So when I was working on my John Burroughs book, John Burroughs' eldest grandchild was still alive, Elizabeth Burroughs Kelly, and she lived on this farm, a fruit farm that he bought along the Hudson River near West Park, New York. When you're on the Burroughs farm and you look across the river, you're looking right at the Vanderbilt Mansion in Hyde Park. And Vanderbilt Mansion didn't exist when Burroughs moved there. And anyhow, his granddaughter lived there, and she was during the last 15 years or so of her life, one of my best friends. I have hundreds of letters that she wrote me. And she had terrible arthritis. When I first started corresponding with her, it took me about 3 hours to read a short letter, trying to figure out what she was saying. But after a while, I had no trouble whatsoever. I was used to her handwriting. But she was just a dear friend. She lived to age 96. One of the privileges of my life was to deliver the eulogy at her funeral. And it was a sad day when she left the world. But anyhow, she lived on this fruit farm. Burroughs grew table grapes. Burroughs was so he had a vineyard, but he didn't, he was a teetotaler, Burroughs. He drank very little alcohol. So he grew table grapes, not grapes for winemaking. And Riverbee vineyard grapes were shipped all over the country. There's still a few of his wooden crates that survived. There are pictures of John Burroughs packing grapes. And she lived there right in the vineyard. And right outside her house, there were trellises with grapevines that Burroughs planted and apple trees that he planted. And it's sort of neat. So in his day, writers were treated by publishers financially even worse than they are today. Burroughs was the most popular nature writer probably really there's ever been in the world. He sold millions of books. And but he got paid just a pittance despite his enormous book sales. And his granddaughter critiqued the manuscript of my biography. I invited her to do it because she knew more about John Burroughs than any college professor, any scholar, and certainly a lot more than I did. And I was very pleased that she found very little wrong with my book. But she did find one significant error where I referred to the royalties that John Burroughs was paid. And she said he wasn't paid royalties. And his granddaughter was great. She never expected me to believe anything on her word. She proved it. So she had a photocopy machine in her highly cluttered living room piled with documents and John Burroughs books and letters and things. And she sent me photocopies of, I have them in a box at home somewhere, of his publishing contracts. And Burroughs, he thought royalties were sort of, you know, there was something unsavory about being paid in that way. So he told Houghton Mifflin, his publisher, that he wanted to be paid a stipend every year. And his stipend, I think, was about $2,000. I think at one point maybe it rose to $2,500. This is a guy who was selling millions of books for Houghton Mifflin. Schools were named after him all over the country. He was read all over the English-speaking world. But he only was earning, and you know, $2,000 went a lot farther than it did now, but it still was very little money. And it was actually a sore point with Mrs. Burroughs that she didn't appreciate his writing really at all. That John Burroughs, you know, worked hard and did all this writing and got paid hardly any money for it. But late in his life, when Theodore Roosevelt started coming to visit, and as President of the United States, he came to visit, and Henry Ford and Thomas Edison started knocking on the door, coming to take John Burroughs on camping trips. Then Mrs. Burroughs realized that maybe what her husband was doing all those years had some value. So thanks. Well, thanks so much for coming. Linger a few minutes if you can. And let me also give a plug for this wonderful organization, Historic Saranac Lake, which runs this terrific museum, which I've enjoyed poking around and we'll come back to. And the project next door, the historic house and doctor's office, and it's looking better every day. I can hardly wait to get in there.
Excited. We're excited to show it off to you guys soon. So if you have supported the project with any amount, $5 or more, we have a party June 28th for all of you guys, and then we also have a big community open house for everybody in July. So lots to show off. The exhibits happen next year. So we're just showing off the beautiful building now. We still have a ways to go. We're very excited to have more space to tell these kinds of stories, to make these connections between people and the bigger natural environment and our region. So this kind of talk, thank you, Alex, for putting these things together. I'm learning so much. It's so good to hear you, Ed, and he's selling books, so be sure to buy some books today. And I want to just say, if you're not on our mailing list, I have these little cards. So leave your name and email, and we'd love to have you on our mailing list so we can stay in touch. And if you're not a member of HSL and you'd like a membership envelope, you can take one of these. Many of them are, and you'll probably be getting one of these in your mailbox soon. So that's the end of my pitch. But please stick around and buy some books. Thank you. Come back soon to the next one.